So I'm here to talk to you today about something that's a little bit uncomfortable, creativity. But the first part of my talk is actually audience participation. So if I could have everyone raise their hands. That includes you watching this on the internet from the future. So why is it that I say creativity is uncomfortable? Well, creativity is uncomfortable for most people because they think of creativity as something like this. Isolated to these singular moments of inspiration or strokes of genius. But creativity has many forms, surely as art, music, movies, science, and innovation, but also as financial spreadsheets, that time you altered a recipe, even the time you wore polka dots and plaid. That might have just been me. In truth, creativity is manifest in every form of social interaction and is as diverse as human expression. Many of these talks today will attempt to inspire you or motivate you. I will attempt to do the same, but because as we already established, all of you are already intimately involved with the creative process. The title of my talk is Hedonistic Creativity. Hedonism is the belief that happiness or pleasure is the ultimate goal in life. Creativity is to do, make, or think of new things. I've combined these concepts in the idea that while creating, your only goal should be the happiness or satisfaction that the process of creating brings you. For many of us, our first experiences with creativity came from our childhood. Mine was no different, entertaining myself with my younger brothers. On one occasion, we tore up shreds of newspaper and we threw them into my mom's antique butter churn and believed we had made peanut butter. On another occasion, the forest surrounding our house was a Jurassic World, and all of the ferns, just for some added excitement, were explosive. And a favorite activity of ours was to pretend that our beds were starships in an intergalactic battle to preserve Earth. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. These aren't creative pursuits. These are just the whimsy of young children's imaginations. And you'd be right. We never were successful in creating peanut butter. None of those ferns ever exploded. And much to my parents' relief, our bedroom was never the site of a major intergalactic battle. Though my mother probably argued it certainly appeared as if it had been. But in other ways, imagination is the most unrestricted form of creativity. It's not even bound by a physical medium. So my goal today is to get you to create as you would have imagined when you were a child. However you choose to apply that, whatever it means to you. But I want you to create with that same joy and passion that you would have created a story when you were a child. We loved our stories. We didn't create them for anyone but ourselves, and no one bothered to take the time to tell us that they were foolish or impossible. I'm now going to talk about a paragon of the creative process, typically pictured as an older man, white beard, Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci has transcended a historical figure and become somewhat of a legend in numerous fields. Many artists, historians, and authors like to assess him within the scope of their own expertise, often lauding his artistic talents, his keen perception, or his dynamic virtuosity. What I want to talk about is how closely tied his curiosity and his imagination were to his creative process. Many of you are probably familiar with Da Vinci as a painter, but more important to our talks today are his notebooks. 5,000 pages of his notebooks have survived to this day. Within those pages are contained sketches, diagrams, calculations, and postulations. Included are his drawings of the birds in flight and what he imagined would be necessary for humans to fly within the limits of our own anatomy. He also had fanciful designs such as a swing bridge. Many would argue is a predecessor to some of the bridges and drawbridges you've seen today. He also designed the aerial screw, predecessor to the helicopter. He even came up with the concept of having a portable printing press so that he could easily take notes and have them in hard copy as he came up with them. He also designed war machines and defenses thought to be century before their time. 5,000 pages are all that survived to today. Many more were discarded carelessly by his apprentices' heirs, thinking that they were invaluable to future generations. 5,000 pages of designs and sketches and theories so barely escaping the imaginary that most of them were never mocked up for testing or even constructed. Probably a good thing too. I'm not sure I'd want to try my skills on a Stairmaster to keep the wing up. Not to mention you'd have to clone Lance Armstrong and have air the consistency of molasses to get that aerial screw off the ground. The fact that his designs so barely escaped imagination and seem so impossible in reality have left people through the ages to wonder if he was just a dreamer who was talented at drawing. My argument is that he didn't miss by much. Take the parachute. It's something that he was pretty spot on about from the get-go. I would say that the voluminous production of his creativity is testament to his own abilities, and I would also say that he's perhaps the best example of hedonistic creativity, following his imagination and curiosity wherever it led him. This is the way that we need to approach our own creative processes. And once we do, we have to do the best we can to protect that idea and not let the world interfere with it. To illustrate this point, I'm now going to tell you a story about Robert Allen Zimmerman. He was born in Duluth, Minnesota, and grew up in the town of Hibbing, Minnesota. Many years later, he would drop out of the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, and he would move to New York City with the dream of being a folk singer and entertainer. Over the next 5 years, he would excite, captivate, astonish, and infuriate the musical world with his constantly evolving musical style, virtuosic songwriting, and mysterious demeanor. He would move from folk singer to protest singer to rock star in an unthinkably small amount of time. Then, at the pinnacle of musical achievement and public awareness, he would disappear. On July 29, 1966, Robert Zimmerman crashed his Triumph motorcycle in upstate New York on the mountainous back roads. In an instant, one of the most public figures of their day vanished without any word. He survived that accident, and he went into retreat in his home in Ulster County, New York. By his own admission, he had been feeling stressed and adrift during his previous tour, and he had needed an escape. He wanted to spend time with his young family, practice his painting, not worry about his image or the demands of the public. Instead, he would rediscover himself musically and write more prolifically than at any other point in his career. In a 7 to 8 month period, he'd write approximately 150 songs, with no intention for these songs to ever be heard by anyone outside of the basement in which they were written and recorded. Inevitably, some of these songs would escape. They would be released as demos by other bands. Some escaped and were released onto the bootleg album, The Great White Wonder. But 118 would go unreleased until just a few months ago. And still many more partial lyrics, complete lyrics, choruses, and verses would remain lost in the letters and writings of Mr. Zimmerman. The individual in the story is better known to you as Bob Dylan. His group of friends, the band The Hawks, who later renamed themselves The Band. And these recordings are collectively known as the Basement Tapes. There's a significant amount of lore and legend that surrounds the events that took place in that pink house in Woodstock, New York. But aside from the fables and speculations, they're held in high esteem by the musical community, not because of their musicality, but because they are the perfect example of the unadulterated creative process. As Dylan said, I just wrote what I felt like writing. And the result was a never-before-heard sound, something produced off the whims of a few friends in a basement with no one but themselves to sing for. Dylan was never one to fear of challenging his fans. In fact, it seemed like he almost went out of his way to earn their ire. He would frequently change. He would, after playing for a long time with Joan Baez, he intentionally played solo. Playing electric was his most recent transgression, which most of his folk fan base considered. They called him Judas. We'll just leave it at that. So if it's difficult for him to create for himself, what does it take for us? These three individuals up here likely never conversed on this topic, but it's actually pretty common. Most authors, writers, musicians have identified that self-doubt is an enemy of the creative process. It causes you to mistrust your own abilities and then thereby devalue your creation. I also want to argue that trying to cater your creation to the demands of the public or to try and gain approval through your work is equally detrimental. Whether through self-consciousness or the seeking of approval, you can't begin the creative process by editing yourself. You have to be bold and self-assured and create only that which you wish to create. The world doesn't like to make it easy for us to do this. In fact, a commonly perpetuated idea is that creativity can be graded. I think in my middle school art class, where a portion of our grade was inevitably assigned by the teacher's own individual scale on whether or not she believed our creation was creative, whatever that meant to her. This, in turn, reminded me of a scene from the movie The Dead Poets Society, where Robin Williams has his character draw this, or a graph similar to this, where he plots the importance of the message of a work of art on one axis and how artfully executed it is on the other axis. And the book would argue that the total area determined the poem's value or its greatness. To which Williams' character turned to his class and said, excrement. This type of grading to a personal scale is actually the most common at how we determine whether or not we appreciate someone else's work. So when you're creating something, you have to understand that once you create it, if you decide to share it, you don't have to. You can create things just for yourself. But if you decide to share it is when it becomes art. As Rihanna Giddens observed, in order for art to have a life its own, you must detach from it. At that point, any criticism is of the art itself through the person's viewing its own experiences and impressions. But the only person who can determine the value of the creative process is the creator themselves. We have established that creativity is only limited by your own imagination. We have also proposed that it should not be graded and cannot be graded. there's also no point at which creativity is achieved. There's no point at which you become creative. By simply being, we create. I would put forward to you that those we perceive as being more creative are really those who are less censored in their creative process. They remain more true to their original creation and are able to better limit those influences of the outside world. Everything I've told to you today, I can't say that it's going to make your creations more important, more profitable, more valuable to society, because that's not what creativity is about. What I'm arguing is that if you remain true to your original goal, you won't care. One of my favorite guitarists, John Butler, has a tune that he wrote while busking on the streets of Fremantle. It's entitled Ocean. What's unique about this tune is that it's recreated every time he plays it. Certain motifs and ideas are repeated, but as a whole, it's new every time. I've personally seen it 6 times and watched 3 different YouTube videos, and I've never seen the same performance. For me, the way he's gone about this tune, and even the title of the tune itself, somewhat represents creativity. It's boundless, unconquerable, omnipresent. All you can do is cruise along in your little boat on this great sea of creativity, heedless of what waits you on the other end. Just plot your course and follow it. As I said earlier, the world doesn't make it easy for you to create. They always assume you have some ulterior motive, some goal for your creation, money, acclaim. In those moments when the world asks you why, I want you to think of Da Vinci's boundless imagination, Dylan's freedom to create, Butler's attempt at a creation that has no end. So when the world asks you why, you can respond, why not? Because isn't that the response your inner child would give? I'm going to conclude today with 2 tunes that are traditional from Irish music, but before that I'm going to play original tune, which was inspired by Irish music but not bound by its typical confines. Mostly because I'd feel a complete charlatan if I didn't write something new for today after giving a long talk about creativity.